So I thought a few pages from Murray Bookchin's book, The Ecology of Freedom, might be relevant to our current predicament regarding the election in November. So Bookchin writes, "The state acquires stability, form, and identity only when personal loyalties are transmuted into depersonalized institutions. Power becomes centralized and professionalized. Customs give way to law, and governance absorbs administration. But the decisive shift from a society to a state occurs with the most supreme political act of all, the delegation of power. It is not insignificant that heated disputes, both theoretically and historically, have revolved about this crucially important act. Social contract theory from Hobbes to Rousseau recognized in the delegation of power an almost metaphysical centrality. The social contract itself was seen as an act of personal disempowerment, a conscious surrender by the self of control over the social conditions of life. To Hobbes and Locke, to be sure, the delegation of power was restricted by the security of life in the case of Hobbes, and its extension through labor into the sanctity of property, as by Locke. Rousseau's views were sterner and more candid than those of his British predecessors. In a widely quoted passage in The Social Contract, Rousseau declared, quote, "Sovereignty, for the same reason as it makes it inalienable, cannot be represented. It lies essentially in the general will, and will does not admit of representation. It is either the same or other. There is no intermediate possibility. The deputies of the people, therefore, are not and cannot be its representative. They are merely its stewards and carry through no definitive acts. Every law the people has not ratified in person is null and void, is, in fact, not a law. The people of England regards itself as free, but it is grossly mistaken. It is free only during the election of members of Parliament. As soon as they are elected, slavery overtakes it, and it is nothing." Removed from the general context of his book, The Social Contract, this passage can be easily misunderstood, but what is important is Rousseau's clear distinction between deputation and delegation, direct democracy and representation. To delegate power is to divest personality of its most integral traits. It denies the very notion that the individual is competent to deal not only with the management of his or her personal life, but with its most important context, the social context. Certainly, early societies did not deal with the issue of delegated power in terms of selfhood and its integrity, but the historical record suggests that they functioned as though these issues profoundly influenced their behavior. So Bookchin goes on to talk about ancient Sumer and the Athenian polis. He references the achievement of Athenian democracy, acknowledging, the condition of women and slaves, which made up the majority of the population in Athens. They weren't allowed to partake in the direct democracy of the polis, right? But nonetheless, what was achieved, I mean, every other city-state and civilization at the time that ancient Athens achieved democracy, quote unquote, practiced slavery. So it wasn't unique that Athens continued to practice slavery, but it was unique that this new form of self-governance emerged. In any event, Bookchin goes on to talk about the way that the polis, or the city-state, with this Athenian example, there was a balance achieved between individual freedom and social cohesion that seems to have been unmatched historically ever since or prior. So there's something in that balance that Bookchin wants to call to our attention. And this is why Bookchin ends up calling his own political philosophy Libertarian Socialism, which seems like an oxymoron to some people, but it's socialism without a state, where it's a form of anarchism, I suppose, closer to anarchism than communism at least, where individuals are free to pursue their own interests. But the thing is, as organisms, we human beings are social. We're social animals, and so our interests are usually common. We have a lot of common interests, and so giving free rein to our own individual interests and desires and needs inevitably ends up allowing we as individuals to form some sort of a social agreement that we're going to lift each other up. And Rousseau and Locke and Hobbes developed their own social contract theories, and in so many ways those old social contract theories are failing us, right? We need to do better than Locke, who thought that human labor turns raw material or dead nature into property and value. I don't think humans are the only laborers, right? And I've written a bit about this recently. All organisms are productive. All organisms contribute to the economy and to the creation of value. And the problem with modern society, as envisioned by Locke and Hume, by Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau in their social contract theories, the problem with modern political economy is that it imagines that the human economy is some sort of perpetual motion machine, right? And that we are not in constant commerce with the non-human world, the community of other organisms of which we make up a small but admittedly powerful part. So Bookchin's trying to put us back into our ecological context, into the context of ecological reality, and say we are not just individuals, we are all kin with other human beings and with every other creature on this planet. We are kin, right? Family values, ecology is all about family values. It's just that it's a much more generalized notion of family. It doesn't diminish our relationship to parents and siblings and grandparents and that lineage. It's just that lineages are only a small facet of how ecologies evolve, right? And so evolution is more than about the replication of genes in a lineage. Genes are shared laterally. Like the vast majority of life on this planet, temporally and spatially, is bacteria. And bacteria are freely sharing genes. It's a gene gift economy among bacteria. And as Lynn Margulis, the biologist, has pointed out, this notion of sharing genes across lines, this notion of symbiogenesis as well, of the sharing of whole organelles and organ systems through processes of symbiogenesis. This is something that Margulis argued was operative not just at the level of bacteria, but even at the level of animals, certainly plants and fungi, but animals as well. There's not evolution just by random mutation as variation under conditions of natural selection in a scarce environment that produces fitter organisms. There's also a process of sharing already formed genetic systems and organs and organelles, and entering into symbiotic relationships so that two formerly free living organisms become one.